Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous, when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found, because God had taken him away. But for before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when he warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children, because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he is as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand in the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth.
You may be seated. It's hard not to read that scripture without a clear understanding of what the author was trying to tell you in his sermon. Then in the 11th chapter, it is those who live and walk by faith. I thought to myself this week a lot about faith. How does it work? How does it move? How do we come to be people of faith? Which I find to be a very kind of funny thought, even in of itself, when I hear people say, well, I'm not very faithful. Well, how are you not faithful? Because I don't know how we would live in this world except in a little box paranoid if we didn't live by faith. By faith, I trust the engineers knew what they were doing. The manufacturers knew what they were doing. The assemblers put everything together when I pushed that little middle pedal on my automobile while going down the hill at a high speed. By faith, when I go to the doctor, I trust that the chemists and the researchers have made the right determination that when I'm ill and the doctor writes that little scribbly stuff on a piece of paper and hands it to me, and I take it to a pharmacist when I'm ill, that what I ingest will, by faith, give me a better quality of life. Relieve my pain, suffering, infection, whatever. By faith, Jenny and I have gone to an attorney and written up a contract that talks about what our final wishes are when this life ends. We believe and trust that that document will be, by faith, recognized by the courts, and our inheritance will be passed on to another generation. By faith, I trust when I go to Kroger's, there's going to be something sitting on the shelf that I want. By faith, when I walk over and flip that light switch, I'm hoping the power company accepts my payment for this month and hopes that I'll do it again next month and the lights will come on. How do we live a life except by faith? Friendships, relationships take faith and trust. By faith, God granted to us 3 boys that we didn't screw up so totally that now they can function on their own. And now, by faith, they're doing it to 2 other little kids. And so the author wants to tell us that faith this morning is the confidence in what we hope for and the insurance for what we do not see. We all live by faith. We may not all live by faith in Jesus Christ. So I thought to myself, how is it that we come to know and to love and to walk by faith? Because that's what the author is encouraging the church to do. It's a time for us in the church calendar to pause and remember, we call it the roll of the saints. I never heard a drum played when we call the saints. Normally a bell is rung. So it's not a drum roll of the saints, but a roll as in the ocean, as in passing on, as in a wave that continues to move closer and closer to us and enfolds us and surrounds us. That now we are in the charter of carrying forward the message of faith, just as these people have done. Not only through their words, but through their witness. Faith requires action. So I invited you today, if you so chose, to bring in a candle. A candle that reflects your friends, your loved ones' faith, and how they have carried the light of Christ in them and now live the fruit of the faith-filled journey. And I considered to myself, well, once I came to Christ, what was the first thing that I did that was stepping out there? That was God-sized. And I thought about a church meeting. I had been invited to be a leader in the church. I don't know why. But I was invited one day with the missions chair as one of the church lay leaders to go to this small little church in the outskirts of the town that we lived in. And to hear a presentation by a young man. You see, his community was starting to literally explode around him. There was new construction right across the road. He was a part-time pastor. He and his wife were trying to raise a newborn infant. And I sat that morning in the small little chapel, and I thought for a moment about our church. The church that my wife and I had joined was only about this time, maybe 12 to 15 years old. This gentleman said, you know, you have been invited here because you are one of the larger congregations in our district. And so we believe that if you find the faith to do so, if you would be willing to pay $2,000 to us per year for the next 3 years, that would move my salary from a part-time position to a full-time position so that I could work to make disciples in the ever-expanding community that we live. And I thought back upon those people who 15 years ago, 6 small families from a church decided that they would leave the comforts of their home church and they would start a new church that we would find ourselves in worshiping one day. I'm told that they met in a barn for 5 years. And I wonder if we have 6 faithful families that be willing to leave the comforts and the ministries of this church to start a new church in faith that God would do an amazing thing amongst us. Those 6 families in cold winters with very little heat, in the smell of a barn, worshiped God in all God had done for them and was going to do through them. And out of that church grew a congregation that when my wife and I left had 700 worshipers in it a week. In a mere 15 years, God had done an amazing thing in that community. Now, as we sat during the coffee hour to consider the invitation that has been given to us to walk by faith, over stale donuts and bad coffee, the best dessert this pastor could put together, by the way, in almost irony. He stood making his presentation with one hand on a laptop trying to operate the PowerPoint because there was no one there to do it, holding his infant because his wife was homesick. I turned to my friend from the church and I said, "How can we say no?" And he said, "I'll tell you how we can say no. You see, I have people in Africa who are struggling to find sustenance. I know people in Haiti, pointed out several third and fourth world countries, but people who didn't even live half as well as the poorest in our country lived. And said, I think if we could raise $2,000 more, it should go to that." And I said, "But you're missing the blessing. You see, if we were to start another congregation, who knows what they could do, and the fruits of our gifts could be multiplied, all for $2,000 a year." Let's remember the faithful who stood before us and said yes some 12, 15 years ago. Well, on Tuesday morning after the meeting was done, I got a call from the pastor who said, "Friends," he said, "Joe, what have you decided?" I said, "Well, we haven't decided anything because we aren't of consensus on this." And I said, "But I'm going to tell you what, I remember those faithful saints who may not even be here today who said yes." Look around this room. More than 100 years ago, there was a group of people who said yes. Take a walk through our museum, and you'll recognize that over 200 years ago, some saints said, we need to gather and say yes. That they put their faith in front of what they knew might come. Did those who gather on 2nd Street in the late 1700s imagine that we would be sitting here today? Are you living a life in such a way that you believe in 100 years from now there will still be Walnut Street United Methodist trying and seeking to make a difference in the community? I said to the pastor, I already filled out the card and I mailed it in before our ad council meeting. And I said, yes, we will support it. Well, what are we going to do with our friend that you disagree with? I said, let me handle that. Let's not have you get in the way. So at the ad council meeting, I stood up and we talked about our presentation, and my friend, with all the passion and vigor, and I know where his heart is, wanting to walk with Christ, said that he felt that if the church could raise $2,000 more over the next 3 years, $6,000 total, that there was a better place to send that money internationally, that he didn't agree. And I said, that's why I signed on the card, yes, we will do this. To which he kind of thundered across the table, who gives you the authority to speak on behalf of this church? And I said, I have none. But I want you to consider the saints who have walked before us, that we might even sit at this table. And how, if we can multiply the church in this world, how it multiplies, like those missionaries going to Mexico and all other places around the world, and makes a difference in the world. I didn't commit on behalf of my church. I committed on behalf of my family. I already wrote the first check. And I'm inviting you and our church to join in to filling the storehouse again. And every year I told Jim, if you are unable to make that commitment, you tell me how much money you need to make the $2,000 commitment that's not in the operating budget, and we will write the check. I will find some way to raise $2,000 per year over the next 3 years that will not affect the budget, because I can speak for us. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. They paid all that money back to us, and they never asked us for a dime. But it took someone taking a leap of faith. I was wondering how I was going to have to go home and tell my wife and sons that we were going to have to start holding a weekly car wash at the church. The boys would be happy because they like wearing shorts at church. They'd have their bathing suits on probably. Maybe how many bake sales would we have to have over the next coming years to raise the $6,000? Some way we were going to do it. Faith is believing and trusting in that which we cannot see, but know to be true. That God was going to be faithful in finding a way, and if He wasn't, He was going to provide my family with enough blessing to bless that ministry. Today, that small little church that could barely afford a part-time pastor has 2 full-time elders in it and is flourishing. Did I know when I wrote the check that that would happen? No. Did these people know when they lived a life of example before you of what it means to be Christ-like? Think that you would be sitting in these pews today? Maybe. Maybe not. For those who died, it tells us in the scripture reading today, all these while they were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners in a foreign land. You see, my trusting in that step led me to be bold in the next step. And that was saying yes and inviting the pastor to buy $4,000 worth of Sunday school class materials and Bible studies when we really had 2 Bible studies and 5 small groups and needed to expand to 8 Bible studies, 4 more Sunday school classes, and 28 small groups. By faith, at the end, we ran out of materials. I never had to write the check for it. And the author allowed us, because they couldn't ship the materials to us, to photocopy their material for the additional people. That step in faith, I believe, led me to say one day, when I looked in the eyes of the woman I love and said, I think we need to go into the ministry. We need to sell our house. We need to put our care and our faith in the trust of somebody greater. We accept in our first 2 years of ministry a salary of $17,000, no health insurance, no benefits, no pension. Our oldest son was in his 2nd year of college. Our second son was getting ready to start a year later. By faith, they've all graduated today. By faith in that time, God has moved us from congregation to congregation, and we have seen the blessing of God's movement and hand every place where we have gone. And by faith, every time I turn and I say to my wife when the bishop calls, it's time for us to move, what do you say? She's learned to trust by faith and say, let's go. By faith, we are here amongst you and continue to do what God calls us to do. Each step of the journey required taking a risk and not being sure that God would catch us. And in each way, we have been lifted up. as you look at that mailer we sent you today, we stand on the top rung, the top step of that church. And each year it's no longer a question or a discussion or an argument, because God continues to provide by faith for our family. Friends, it's not as though I'm starving, right? Let's be honest. By faith, we step out as a team in Mexico that God would use us. By faith, John steps out in China and passes out Bibles in Chinese. By faith, we continue to carry the message because we remember the saints who did that for us and brought us to this place and have called us to be just as faithful as they are. Just as faith-filled as we are. So I ask you, what is it this week that you might consider to do in taking a leap of faith? How has God been knocking upon your heart to say, yes, yes I will? To take one faithful step in some unexpected way with the hopes and the prayer, God, you're going to have to catch me on this one because I'm not really sure how this is going to work out. To hear the promptings of God saying, just take the step. And to find the journey so much more worth it than the risk. By faith, you have been saved. And by faith, you will come one day to live eternally with them. At the end of this service, we will extinguish their light because the light is now in us and on us and through us to the world to walk by faith. How can we be assured? Just as the brakes in my car, the shelves at Kroger, the wellness I have received through the pills and the medicine I've been given, my experience has told me everything. But for us who walk in Christian love, their witness tells us just how far we can go. Let's pray as the band comes forward this morning. Gracious and holy God, we thank you for the beautiful cloud of witnesses that have walked the journey and now rest, whose witness and example of faith have taught us that we can be more, that we can place more trust, more of our lives, more of our future in your hands and experience the beautiful fruit that comes through it. Help us this week to find a place somewhere in the world to demonstrate our faith, our hope, our trust in you. Catch us, lift us up, and set us back on the journey that we might take another step in faith. And all God's children said, Amen. Amen.